Welcome back to another edition of Through the Smoke, a Miami Hurricanes football and recruiting podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Network. David Lake coming to you with another solo podcast. Just got back from Charlotte, North Carolina for ACC Media Days. So, want to do a podcast and just kind of recap my thoughts, what we learned, discuss some of the buzz, feelings on things on Miami, and just general opinions too on the ACC. Before we dive into things, of course, want to highlight a couple of our sponsors, and we'll start with Canes Connection. So, we told you, even after this house settlement deal, that collectives we didn't think were going anywhere. They were still vitally important. Yes, you have teams now able, or schools, programs now able to pay players directly. Uh, but as we've, just this week, right, collectives are still going to be a huge part of um talent acquisition in the NIL space. So that's not going away. And again, if you sign up today, Canes Connection has a great deal for Through the Smoke listeners here. If you sign up today for a monthly membership and type in the promo code 247 friends, you now get 50% off your first month. If you continue that membership for 3 consecutive months after that, you'll get some cool swag, as it relates to the tier that you did sign up for. So if you sign up for a tier that, and one of the benefits of that tier is that you get some swag, you'll get that after your third consecutive month. And look, sign up for Canes Connection because you want to help the program. It's a vital piece of the equation. But they do have some cool swag, whether it's hats, coffee cups. I've received some cool stuff from Canes Connection, and I think fans would enjoy rocking some of that out in public as well. Again, 247 friends, 50% off first month membership, canesconnection.com. Go support those guys. Nick Musarino at the Musarino Law Group. If you've been injured in a car accident, call 561-960-9870 or visit themusarino.lawgroup.com. Nick's a huge Miami Hurricanes fan. Season's right around the corner, so I know he's excited about the season opener against Notre Dame and fall camp. Important time for the program here coming up. Again, any law needs you have, Nick Musarino at the Musarino Law Group. His contact information is in the show notes. So, all right, let's dive into ACC Media Day talk. It's a good setting to kind of get a feel for not only where Mario Cristobal feels like things are at with his program, but also the team. 4 representatives, 4 players there for Miami representing the Hurricanes. Quarterback Carson Beck, offensive lineman Francis Maui Noah, Akeem Mesidor, the defensive end, of course, and then Wesley Bassett, linebacker. So, Miami's always generous with their time during this event, and I was personally able to get one-on-one interviews, one-on-one talks with all the guys. So, just kind of want to share my takeaways. Quick hitter-ish type of format. Y'all know I kind of can ramble once I get going, but want to kind of just quick hitter provide what we learned. So first off, just starting with Mario Cristobal. Look, I don't think going into year 4, we all know what Coach Cristobal is about in terms of publicly how he wants to set the tone for his program, what he expects. And look, you're never going to get Coach Cristobal giving you flowery quotes on the record about how he really likes a team or feels a certain way about a team in a positive sense. But I think it's fair for me to pass along. Like, I think Coach Cristobal is very excited about how this team's coming together to this point. Now, I would recognize, he would recognize that you still have to go do it on the field, but on paper, in terms of just how the roster looks from a depth and talent standpoint, it's the best that Miami has looked under his leadership here going into year 4. I think he's also pleased with the leadership overall within the roster, the culture that Miami now reflects. It's where he wants it to be going into year 4. It's full of a lot of guys that are kind of willing to do the extra work outside of what is required of them at the college level. So at the college level, right? I mean, everyone knows you're required to do a ton, whether it's, your strength and conditioning work, your film study. When the season starts, you got your practices, right? But the best programs, the best teams, and back when Miami was Miami, the superpower of the sport, they were also a team full of guys that embraced doing the extra stuff that was not required of them. And when Mario first arrived in 2022, that necessarily wasn't the culture at Miami. It was a lot of guys clocking in, clocking out, working hard, doing the stuff that is required of them, but not doing that little bit extra that kind of gives you that edge, because the margin for winning in college football gets narrower and narrower every year. And so these are the marginal gains it takes, along with, stacking talent, recruiting, all that type of stuff. The extra work is kind of what separates you, and also just, uh, establishes a strong culture week to week during the season, and winning tough games. Um, I think Coach Cristobal recognizes too, like the leadership of this team is going to look different. We touched on in a previous podcast how, Cam Ward really was a dynamic leader. I think he grew into that role at Miami. I don't think he was necessarily that guy at Washington State. He was absolutely that guy at Miami. And he kind of, uh, showed the way for these Hurricanes in 2025 as to how accountable leadership, vocal leadership, is supposed to look. Uh, I asked Coach Cristobal, like, do you believe that leadership can happen without it being vocal? And he was like, look, I think, people talk about leading by example, and that's a good thing. I'm never going to look down on that. But to me, that just means you're a good citizen. That means you're doing the right things. You're not a bad egg. You are doing what's asked of you, and that's great. We like those type of guys. But championship level teams are player led, and they are full of vocal leaders on both sides of the ball, offense and defense. And I think Cam Ward kind of showed the team last year how important that is to have those type of players. And I think the hope is, um, that more players across different position groups are going to have that, embrace that type of leadership here going into 2025. And look, I know, frankly, leadership talk it's a common theme going into every season, and every season you get the quotes where, oh, the leadership's much better this year, this year, this year. I think it's a valid talking point going into this season as it relates to Miami, though, because Cam Ward was so important for the Hurricanes in that regard last year. There's a void there that needs to be filled. I think Miami this year is a more talented roster up and down. Um, but it all has to come together. And I think an important part of that is, okay, when the adversity strikes, whether that's during a game, whether that's after a loss, whether that's after an injury, et cetera, who are the leaders on the team that are going to step up and push forward and, look, this doesn't matter. Let's keep it going, all that type of good stuff. So it's also fair. Like, I think Mario Cristobal's pleased with the way that Carson Beck has embraced this leadership role. Your quarterback has to lead vocally. And, I think Carson Beck is, I think it's fair to say he's not Cam Ward in that regard, but he's a vocal leader. He's led at Georgia, and he knows what it's supposed to look like in terms of that. He's also excited about the trenches. This is year 4 of Mario's time. And so a lot of these guys came up with Mario here since 2022 or 2023, and he wants a program in which the trench position groups lead. His quote was, "Look, we want to be a program that wins up front, and we want to be a program that leads from the front." So he wants his offensive line to be, significant leaders on the team this year. He's very excited about that group. And I think the same can be said for the defensive line with Akeem Mazador, Ruben Bain, key contributors in that regard from a leadership standpoint. So, overall, I think again, you're never going to get Coach Cristobal come out and say publicly, hey, this is the best team that I've had so far at Miami to this point. Um, but I think it's fair for me to pass along and say, like, look, I think he recognizes that this is the best team he has had on paper to this point. And so now it's about going out and doing it, having a good fall camp, and going out and performing during the season. So quarterback got some time with Carson Beck. He was impressive. He's just a pro, and really that shouldn't be surprising, I guess, because he's a sixth-year player. We talked about last year this idea of why it was so big for Miami to add Cam Ward outside of just his talent. These guys that uh, are veteran transfers that turned down the NFL to come back for one more year of college and work on their games. They're essentially professional players still playing in college. And Carson Beck is absolutely that type of player, that type of quarterback. Um, again, he was the face of the program at arguably the top program in the sport right now in Georgia. So, handling ACC Media Days was nothing new for him, nothing hard. There was a lot of UGA media, Georgia media that was there and wanted to get his perspective on things in terms of, leaving that program. And he handled all those questions well. Um, in my interview with him, I really wanted to talk about like the process of recovering from his off-season elbow deal and get a sense for where he was at with, his confidence in his arm now. And he said, look, he's been throwing really since late April. He admitted like, for the he was cleared maybe mid-ish to late-ish April, and he admits like for the first 10 to 14 days after that, it took some time to get confidence going in that arm. In addition to like he just had to loosen it all up, his forearms, his triceps, his shoulder, his biceps, all that needs to be loosened up and worked out because he hadn't really been throwing for the past 4 or 5 months. So that was a process to get through that. He said then there was a workout back home. He's from Jacksonville. He's back home working out late April, early May, around that time. And, the guys he was working with were just told him, hey, man, just let it rip. Just let's see how it feels. Let it rip. And he did. And he said, man, it felt so good. And it was huge for his confidence. And then after that, it just slowly built, built, built. And, after those first few days of just finally letting it rip, he says now he doesn't even think about it. Feels great, feels strong, and he's been good to go ever since. So he's been fully throwing since May, um, and there's really no concerns at this point with his arm. He's, also wanted to talk about the idea of kind of embracing a fresh start at Miami. I think it's an opportunity again. Cam Ward came to Miami. At Washington State, he wasn't necessarily this big, dynamic, amazing leader. But at Miami, it was a fresh start, new opportunity to establish who he could be, who he wanted to be for this Miami team. And he really embraced that leadership role. So I wanted to get a sense for Carson if he feels it's kind of a similar opportunity. And he said absolutely. He had been at Georgia for 5 years. And so just like anything in life, right? When you've been at a place for 5 years, people kind of have preconceived notions about who you are or kind of still view you as the person you were when you first showed up to a place. When, in Carson's case, when he was 18 years old. So he's kind of enjoyed this new opportunity at Miami to get clean slate, fresh start. Hey, this is who I am. This is who I want to be as your leader. Let's get to work. So I think he's embraced that too. Want to get a sense too for his chemistry with the receivers, how that's been going because he was out during the month of spring football in terms of on-field work, and he's been pleased with what they've done in the film room, how they've it sounds like he's doing a lot of film sessions. He kind of said, I don't know if this is every day, but sounds like some days 6 a.m. film sessions with, 1 to 5 guys in the receiver room, whoever wants to show up. And then they'll do their player led practices. And then after that, they'll do a big film session with the entire pass catching group. And he said those have been really productive, really good. These guys at receiver, he says, do an excellent job of um, taking in what they discuss in a film session and translating it to a field relative to the different looks that they might get on, from a defense. So he's been pleased just with the intelligence of the group, the work ethic of the group. He says these guys grind, these receivers. He's really encouraged with that. I think, that's a reflection too of kind of the older guys Miami's brought in here over the last year. Guys like CJ Daniels, Keelan Marion, Tony Johnson. Those guys have pro mentalities because they started from, the bottom at college, at the college level. CJ Daniels started his career at Liberty, had to work his way up LSU. Now he's at Miami. Keelan Marion started his career at UConn, went to BYU, now at Miami. Tony Johnson started as a walk-on at FAU, worked his way up Cincinnati, now Miami. So these guys have worked their way to Miami. They have brought that work ethic to the receiver room. Particularly I think CJ Daniels, from what I understand, does an excellent job of kind of setting the tone from a leadership standpoint and work ethic standpoint. A lot of the buzz around Carson Beck, talking to the guys, both Coach Cristobal and the other players, about Carson Beck. Everyone's very, very impressed with his football intelligence, really good communicating with teammates what he wants. We talk about how he leads these pass catching or receiver film sessions. He also jumps in on the offensive line film sessions, and because he wants to know what those guys look for, calls, checks, etc. And Francis Mauigoa has said, look, in player-led practices, um, on the offensive line, we'll make a call, and then Carson might see something from his perspective and check it, change the call, and Francis Carson's right when he does that. So um, they're building full confidence, and Carson's, and I've heard this from coaches too, just behind the scenes, they feel like he's one of the smarter players they've ever encountered, just in terms of being on the board, understanding concepts, understanding what to do against certain looks and coverages and defenses. Carson's very intelligent guy and knows how to get it done in that regard. Um, Also wanted to talk about with Carson, again, he's been at Georgia. He led Georgia for 2 seasons, was successful at Georgia, was there when they were also winning national championships when he was a backup, right? So the point the point in all this is he knows what big time programs look like. And so I wanted to get a sense for him, hey, how would you compare just program wise? Miami's still trying to get to that point that Georgia's at now as an established powerhouse program. But what are the vibes like of the program, the cultures of the program? And he said, look, they're pretty similar with the way they operate and how serious they both take football. And so he's enjoyed that part of being at Miami too. Running back, um, look, I think it's fair to say, we know a lot about Mark Fletcher. Coach Cristobal excited about this is his first full healthy offseason at Miami, and he's going to enter camp in great shape, best shape of his life, looking great, looking strong. Jordan Lyle, probably the most talented guy in the running back room, and he's just got to go seize this opportunity. Really excited about new guy Marty Brown too, the North Dakota State transfer, over 1,100 yards there at that FCS level. Mario Cristobal says he is a 215-pound running back that power cleans. I think he said 335. All this is essentially say, look, he came from the FCS level, but he is a big explosive back, and he's going to help us. And my takeaway, one thing I like about this running back room is it's 3 running backs, all over 200 pounds. Honestly, all probably over, I don't know, Jordan Lyle's got to be 210. He looks like he's 210, a good 210, all over 210, all with experience. Because look, I think last year, Miami's top 3 running backs were also 200 plus pounds: Damian Martinez, Mark Fletcher, Jordan Lyle. Um, but Jordan Lyle was a freshman, right? So these guys all have experience. They're all over 200 pounds. You need those backs to make deep runs, navigate a season. And now you got to think about the postseason. If you're good enough to get there, you got to have big, strong, physical running backs that can, carry the load in December. Hopefully you get there. Wide receiver, again, we've kind of touched on it with Carson Beck. CJ Daniels has impressed with his approach, work ethic. He's healthy now. We saw him at the end of spring when he was still kind of working his way back from, off-season surgery, and get a lot of positive feedback about just what he's going to bring. I view him as like a consistent, dependable type of receiver. I think the explosive type of receiver would be like your Keelan Marion, the BYU transfer. I know they're excited about everything he does. He's just got to translate it all to the field, but his speed has been impressive, is my understanding. JoJo Trader, look, everyone in the building, everyone on the team recognizes he's, I don't know, a top 5 talent on the team. He has to go put it all together, and he has to go grab this opportunity. If he waits for the opportunity to be given to him, then these older receivers that Miami brought in aren't going to allow him to get that opportunity, if that makes sense, right? So JoJo's got to go win this job, go take the opportunity, go make plays, stay healthy, because he has been, dealing with some injury issues, little stuff that's knocked him out here and there during his Miami career. But I think Carson Beck told me he's like one of the most athletic receivers he's ever seen. And he said there was one day where it was before like a player-led practice, and it was a backup quarterback just kind of throwing balls to JoJo, and one ball was like a little bit high, and JoJo jumped, caught it with one hand, and simultaneously did a backflip as he caught that pass. And Carson was like, I was just like, what did I just see? And JoJo was nonchalant about it, like, man, I've been doing that since I was like 12 years old. So everyone knows how good JoJo Trader is. He's just got to go take it. Also, just get a lot of Malachi Tony buzz. The reclassified freshman, a guy who should be playing his senior year of high school right now, but man, everyone's very excited about what he brings. I think just the dog mentality, and he does have playmaking potential, but I think everyone views him as like he's going to be a dude at slot receiver for Miami. It's just a matter of what that timeline looks like. Is it going to be game 1? Is it going to be game 6? Is it going to be game 9? Is it going to be next year? Right. So, but everyone's very excited about Malachi Tony and what he shows. Offensive line, again, we kind of already touched on this group about how excited Mario Cristobal is about this group. 4 returning starters basically from last year. They add James Brockermeyer. And again, he's not going to ever overly praise the offensive line group. That's just not what Mario Cristobal, it's not what Alex Mirabal's about either. They're not going to overly praise their group publicly. But I do think there is a belief that this starting 5 has the potential to be the best starting 5 in the country. I think they want to depend or lean heavily on this group. They view them as a group that can mash in the run game and as a group that can protect Carson Beck in the pass game. So I'll say this, like from an ACC perspective, there is not another offensive line group in the ACC that looks anything close to Miami's group. And Francis Mauigoa was at ACC Media Days, and he's looking great from a body type perspective. 6'6", 335, strong, lean, ready to go. Last year, Francis Mauigoa had surgery on both of his shoulders, and so he was out for 5 or 6 months during the off season. And it's tough to develop when you're dealing with off season surgeries. So this year he was healthy the whole off season, and you can tell like he's very confident and feels like he's put in some good work during the off season. I don't think it's hyperbolic to say there's a chance that all 5 of these projected starting offensive linemen, so Markel Bell, Matthew McCoy, James Brockermeyer, Inez Cooper, Francis Mauigoa, there's a chance all 5 get drafted after this season. I think the 2 you would watch in that regard, James Brockermeyer, center. It's hard to get drafted as a center, but I think there's a chance he has a great year and could be a 7th round pick as a center. And then Matthew McCoy, Certainly has the body type, certainly has the potential and athleticism to be drafted after this year. But he could also decide to come back for one more year of eligibility if he wants to show what he can do as a tackle. Maybe he's afforded that opportunity with coming back to Miami. But this is a very talented group. And in terms of the depth, there is a belief. I think that Samson Okunlola has legitimately taken a next step, and they're excited about him and what he's showing right now this offseason and how he's performing. Tommy Kinsler, similar too. Like he's a guy that they're excited about long term as a future starter down the road. He's taken a massive step in terms of the like young guys. Um, I think all these guys are freshmen coming in, early enrollee freshmen. S.J. Alafatuli, the center from Bishop Gorman, just excited about his approach, his work ethic. Um, Explosive athlete too. Not the biggest guy, but explosive athlete relative to his size. Jaden Wilkerson, massive offensive lineman, athletic guy too, at his size, out of Orlando. They're very excited about him long term. And Max Buchanan, interior guy, very excited about him long term as well. He's added some good mass since arriving at Miami. Defensive line, Keem Mesidor looks great. Lost 20 pounds since last year. Uh, he's going to focus mostly on playing off the edge at defensive end. At Miami, he's been a total team guy. He's helped on the edge. He's helped on the interior. This year he's going to focus on edge at about 258 pounds is kind of what he's saying. He's weighing in at this, right now going into this season. The key with him, frankly, is just simply staying healthy. He's taken up swimming as an activity to lose weight while not beating up the body too much, while working out. And so, yeah, he's looking good. When you think about it too, really, Akeem Mesidor, Ruben Bain, Miami's projected starters at defensive end, they've not really played together for a season, when fully healthy. So in 2023, Mesidor missed a lot of time, I think, with a foot deal, if I remember correctly. And then in 2024, Ruben Bain, he played plenty of snaps, but he had a significant muscle injury in the season opener against Florida, missed 4 or 5 games, came back second half of the season, played plenty of snaps, but wasn't ever really quite right. And so I think the focus for both of them is like, look, how do we improve our conditioning? How do we get to a point where, we embrace the recovery processes and all those things that are necessary for navigating season, being healthy. And so that's a significant focus for both those guys. And if they are healthy, there's no reason why they can't be a top 2, top 3 defensive line, if not the best in the ACC. So um, that's something to keep an eye on. Just those guys have both trimmed down, I think, this offseason, and both guys are very hopeful that they put in the work to be fully healthy for the entire season. Um, Defensive tackle, look, lots of optimism around Ahmad Moten, David Blade, Justin Scott. They just got to go out and do it. I think, for me, like, it's an area to keep monitoring because I think the talent's there, but they got to go out and do it. In terms of like the depth guys, Armando Blunt's a guy that gets a ton of praise. 2024 class signee, 5-star guy. The thing everyone says about him is his motor is crazy and best motor on the defensive line, which is high praise because Ruben Bain plays with a very high motor. In my opinion, Akeem Mesidor also plays with a high motor when he's at his best. So I think everyone kind of recognizes Armando Blunt goes out, plays hard, and they expect him to be a disruptive player off the edge in that rotational role. And then Marquise Lightfoot is another 5-star from that 2024 class who, everyone recognizes came in and needed to go through a maturation process last year in his first year at the college level, but he has matured a lot and with his approach. And I think there's a lot of optimism that he's going to be able to show what he can do in this Corey Heatherman defense from an athleticism and length standpoint. So Those are the depth guys to know right now. Linebacker, man, Mo Torre, the Rutgers transfer, Mohamed Torre, it sounds like he's come in and quickly established himself as one of the alphas on the team, might already be the vocal leader of the linebacker room. He of course already knows Corey Heatherman's defense because he played under Heatherman at Rutgers when Heatherman was a position coach at Rutgers. And adding him, like to me, adding him was critical. Of course, Miami opens up with Notre Dame, who has one of the best offensive lines in the country, has one of the best running backs in the country, and Jeremiah Love. And you're going to need Mohamed Torre, to be a significant part of trying to contain that running game. So everyone's very excited about him and the leadership he's bringing. Wesley Saint is up to 230 pounds. That's up 10 pounds from the weight that he played last year. He's looking good. Excited about playing in this defense. He says it's much more simplified. It's easier to play and just play fast. And he thinks that's going to significantly help Miami at the linebacker level and frankly the back seven level. Kamal Bonner, the NC State transfer, is a player Mario Cristobal is excited about from a length, athleticism standpoint at the linebacker level. He said the focus for him when he first arrived was getting his, weight up, strength up, and he's up to 220 pounds now. So Mario Cristobal is excited about that. And then probably the fourth linebacker I would say right now going into camp would be Popo Aguirre. Probably going to be that backup middle linebacker to Mohamed Torre, and they're excited about how he's continuing to progress too and work hard. Secondary, look, I think there's a lot of confidence in this group being much improved. We've talked all offseason about how Miami has flipped that room in terms of personnel in the portal with adding Xavier Lucas, Keontae Scott, Ethan O'Connor, Charles Brantley, Zachariah Poyser, Jacoby Thomas, while returning talented guys like OJ Frederic and Damari Brown, right? So that room looks the part. It's flipped in terms of talent. To me now the question, and I think the fair talking point coming out of ACC Media Days, how does this group piece together? How does it come together, both from a chemistry standpoint, from a gelling standpoint, from a communication standpoint, from embracing different roles type of standpoint? Because look, in terms of just players and talent, I think, frankly, like maybe this is hyperbolic, maybe this is crazy. I think Miami could be a top 5 secondary in the country this year, particularly because of what they have at the cornerback position. But I also wonder, like when I look at this group, and I think this is still a question mark, just after talking with people, I think, who's going to be the leader of this secondary? Because it's still, one thing with transfers is not all transfers come in and have that alpha dog mentality like a Mohamed Torre. And so I think in the secondary, some of these transfers have come in and they're just trying to earn their role and earn their job, earn their snaps. I think if I was going to highlight one guy, maybe, well, I don't even know. It seems like just talking, Keontae Scott is a guy I feel like could maybe bring some vocal leadership from a new transfer perspective. Uh, there's a lot of excitement, a lot of buzz about Keontae Scott. He, of course, played at Auburn the last 3 years, transferred to Houston, then, in the spring window came to Miami. So he's going to fill that nickel role, which was an issue, a massive issue for the Miami defense last year. But anyways, I want to know, um, who's going to step up and be the vocal leaders in the secondary, because that's going to be important with getting on the same page. Because yes, you're a very talented group, but you have to all be on the same page. You have to know what every other player in the secondary is thinking in terms of their assignments. And look, just in general, like who's willing to be unselfish for the greater good? If it is best for the group for a corner to go help at safety, are you going to embrace that? If a corner has to kick inside to play nickel, are you going to embrace that? I think everything's there from a talent perspective for this group. It just has to all come together. On paper, You go OJ Frederique, Xavier Lucas, Keontae Scott at nickel, Zechariah Poyser and Jacoby Thomas at safety. I think Jacoby Thomas, we'll see. I think they feel confident in Zechariah Poyser, what he showed in the spring. Jacoby Thomas, they just don't know. Like they like what they saw on tape from him, and he's a physical player. But you don't know till you see it in practice, and so the safety position to me is still kind of a wait and see type of deal. Um, Also asked Coach Criswell about Bert Auburn, right? The Texas kicker transfer. And, look, he admits like the way it ended for Bert wasn't great. He was a player that lost his confidence, which is a big deal, of course, at kicker, such a mental type of position. But he said, look, before that, he was a great kicker for Texas, one of their most productive kickers for Texas. And we feel like with our operation at long snapper holder and while also kind of cleaning up maybe some of the kicking techniques that need to be cleaned up, we can get Bert Auburn back on track to where he was when he was kicking well for Texas. So, um, look, I think both things can be true. Number one, Miami really needed to go out and get Bert Auburn to solidify that kicker spot. Where they were at in the spring wasn't ideal. They needed to go out and add someone like Bert Auburn. So they did that. Is Bert Auburn going to be good enough? That's remains to be seen. He's certainly following, a tremendous kicker at Miami in Andy Borregales. So those are big shoes to fill. Is he going to be that? I mean, those are big expectations. That's a high bar. Uh, but to me, can he be an effective kicker in key situations? He can be. It's just hard to know, what a guy who is, dealing with confidence issues at his previous place. It's hard to predict or project how that's going to go. ACC finish. So, be in there, you get invited to vote for first team all ACC team and then vote on projected order of finish in the ACC. And so I'll share my ACC finish because the first team stuff to me is, pedantic to get into. But ACC finish, I went Miami 1, Clemson 2, Louisville 3, Georgia Tech 4, SMU 5. So we'll stop there, just 5. We don't need to get in the weeds beyond that. Look, I expect Miami to go at least 7-1. You get bye weeks around games like FSU and Louisville, which are key games. You get SMU at the start of November. And then you got to finish strong, road games, Virginia Tech and Pittsburgh in November. So I think 7-1's more than a fair expectation for Miami. Uh, Clemson, I think you go I look at their schedule because look, in a 17-team conference, your schedule is a massive part in, getting to Charlotte. Uh, Clemson, a tricky game for them from an ACC perspective is they go at Georgia Tech in week 3. That's going to be a war of a game, I think. UNC, they go at UNC, which, we'll see what they are this year, but Bill Belichick, we'll see. He's going to have some things up his sleeve, I think. They host SMU and they go at Louisville. So I think Clemson's good. I'm just a little bit meh on their depth. Uh, if they avoid injuries, they'll be in Charlotte. To me, they're probably in that 7-1 range too. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if Clemson goes 9-3 again this year. Louisville, I think Louisville. The tough thing about Louisville is they play Miami, Clemson, and SMU, who people view those 4 teams, Louisville, SMU, Miami, Clemson, as the top 4 of the ACC. And from a talent standpoint, and I wouldn't push back on that. I think Louisville beats SMU, so that's why I put Louisville 3rd. Georgia Tech. Um, look, they have a nice schedule. They open with Clemson, but then after that, it's just kind of like, okay, they should, they're going to be tough outs for the rest of their ACC schedule. The thing I wonder, and maybe this is unfair, can just their style of play, sledgehammer physical style of play. Haynes King's a grinder of a quarterback. Can he play a whole season like that? I think if he can play a whole season like that, Georgia Tech might be in the mix to get to Charlotte. They might be a 7-1 type of ACC team. If they're dealing with the injury stuff again and, guys are in and out of the lineup, to me, they might be more of a 6-2 type of ACC team. And SMU, I think they aren't quite on the level of Miami, Clemson, and Louisville. I think they lose all three of those games, and they're like a 5-3 type of team in the conference. So, I have Miami and Clemson in that 8-0, 7-1 range. Louisville 6-2, Georgia Tech 6-2, SMU 5-3. And just, people might be curious where I have FSU. I put them like right in the middle of the ACC, number 8. To me, they're like a 6-6 or 7-5 type of team in the regular season. So that kind of wraps that talk up. I asked subscribers on the message board, on Through the Smoke message board, if you guys have any questions. I'd take a few here as it relates to ACC Media Days. And so let's dive into that. A lot of the questions, there was a lot of questions about thoughts on the ACC, thoughts on realignment talk. Is there anything cooking there as it relates to Miami? Look, I still think like long term, Miami's in a good spot. The university is willing to supplement um, the gap that's growing between the ACC and the Power Two conferences. The Big Ten and the SEC payouts are going to be a lot more than what the ACC is getting here moving forward. And Miami is willing to close that gap internally with their own funding in the short term, immediate future. Does Miami want to do that for a decade? Absolutely not. But for a handful of years, sure. And so I think the focus now is kind of sustained winning for Miami. Yes, it's important to be a big brand, which Miami is, but it's also important to be a big brand, a big winning brand. And, look, I think Miami's going to end up in whatever the next iteration of, the realignment looks like. Miami's going to end up okay. And so whenever that does happen, whether that means you jump to a super conference, you jump to the Big Ten, you jump to the SEC, whatever it is, you want to be in a place that you can make a smooth transition. Um, you don't want to you want to be more like Oregon to the Big Ten, how they transitioned. You want to be like Texas to the SEC, how they transitioned. You don't necessarily want to be like Oklahoma to the SEC right now or USC to the Big Ten. Those programs are in a sputtering situation in a new conference that's much more competitive compared to where they just were. So Miami's focus right now, again, is winning in the ACC, winning the ACC. Miami's going to be fine in the long run. The waters are a little murky in the short term. But Miami, and frankly, like this is where I'm at too. You got to go win the ACC before Miami can even think about like realignment and joining a bigger conference. Go win the ACC for the first time in program history. Um, and look, I think it's fair too to recognize the ACC is providing performance-based incentives for teams that are successful in their conference, both in terms of like being a big brand. So, if you're get pulling strong TV ratings, you'll get more money than the programs that aren't. And also, there's the performance-based stuff of like winning the ACC, you get a little more money, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, that all that stuff matters too, and that's a good thing in terms of like trying to go out and win. So, um, but yes, I certainly recognize the ACC is a lesser conference than like the Big Ten or the SEC. What does the long-term future of the ACC look like? It doesn't look great, obviously. Um, and look, outside of Miami, the ACC is getting lapped in talent acquisition by the Big Ten and the SEC. Um, and it's just kind of compounding every year. It showed up on the field, in my opinion, last year during the season. Um, I think it's going to show up a little bit more even this year on the field. when you watch average SEC games compared to average ACC games, that doesn't mean there's not going to be good teams in the ACC. It's just a much better conference, top to bottom. And look, I think people that really know football and understand football will get to the point where, and I don't know if that'll be this year or next year or the year after, but there's going to be a recalibration where, okay, going 8-4 in the SEC is in some ways more impressive than going 10-2 in the ACC. Again, is that thought going to be happening this year? Probably not, but that is going to be coming down the road because the SEC is just getting crazy competitive. Um, Anyways, that's going down a tangent. Next question comes from GAHS for Canes. Who is your sleeper ACC team for this season? So if we're talking sleeper ACC team to get to Charlotte, I think you got to talk outside of the top four. I think you got to talk outside of like Miami, Clemson, SMU, Louisville. Those are kind of the betting favorites um, to win the ACC. So outside of that, I would go Georgia Tech. Again, we talked about them earlier. I think they got a fairly favorable path, to potentially get it done. They do have to play Clemson, but then after that, it's like Wake, Virginia Tech, Duke, Syracuse, NC State, BC, and Pitt. You got to go 7-1 against that slate to get there. Um, I think Georgia Tech potentially can thread the needle if Haynes King stays healthy and it even takes a little bit more of a step forward too as a veteran guy in his final year. Um, if I'm going deeper than Georgia Tech, I would I would probably bring Virginia to the table as like a deep, deep, deep sleeper. They avoid Miami and Clemson on their schedule. They play NC State, Stanford, FSU, Louisville, UNC, Cal, Wake, Duke. They have a intriguing college quarterback transfer, guy that's just kind of makes plays, runs around, makes plays, throws it around the yard a little bit. Chandler Morris threw for 3,700 yards and 31 touchdowns last year at North Texas, ran for 250 and 4 touchdowns. So he's a tough guy to defend. Started his career at Oklahoma, so he has that type of talent. And it's intriguing to me. I think too, potentially, like Virginia's done a lot of work in the portal this offseason. And I think it's on the table that, to me, like Miami's portal class is the best in the ACC. I think it's on the table that maybe Virginia's portal class is second best. If that's the case, they are a deep, deep, deep sleeper team to just keep an eye on. I wouldn't predict it, of course. I'm still predicting Miami and Clemson. But if you had to go off the board, I would go with those two. Third Kane asks, who will be the biggest surprise starter versus Notre Dame, offense and defense? So one thing, I don't know, I find this interesting and I find this to be a good thing. One thing I kind of like about this team is you kind of know. I mean, there's always going to be one or two surprises maybe, but there's really not going to be that, to me, that many crazy surprises in the starting lineup against Notre Dame because this team is full of veteran, productive guys that have done it before, and they slot in how you think they should slot in. Um, if I am going to predict, maybe I don't even know if these are like crazy predictions, but like I would say keep an eye on Malachi Tony, maybe. Uh, the true freshman slot receiver. Miami's got Tony Johnson there, who they brought in from Cincinnati. Uh, and Miami's got Ray Joseph there as well, a veteran guy who's been with the program now for going on. This will be his third year. I would keep an eye on Malachi Tony. Would I predict it? Probably not, but that's one to keep an eye on. And then Damari, like on defense, I'd probably go, keep an eye on Damari Brown. Like I think he's very talented. Could he force his way into the starting lineup? I think that's on the table. I would also say keep an eye on Kamal Bonner, the NC State transfer. Frankly, I think the position battle between him and Wesley Bissaint is going to be very interesting to monitor. So those would probably be my two. Non 5199793 asks, What are your thoughts on the talent and depth at defensive tackle and safety? These will be two critical positions in the Notre Dame game. We are putting a lot on the shoulders of Poyser. Are we sure he's a player? The depth at defensive tackle is concerning, particularly given that Mesidor is adamant about sticking at edge. Yeah, wouldn't push back on all that. I would also bring a third spot. I'd bring the kicker spot, as we discussed earlier. Bert Auburn. In these games against Notre Dame, against Florida, against Louisville, against SMU, every point matters, and you need your kicker to be on point in those games. So, but I want to push back on any of that. I think if you're making me pick which one am I more comfortable with right now, D tackle or safety, I would probably say D tackle I'm more comfortable with because I do think they legitimately have talent. Justin Scott, I think, can be a really good player. It's just about timeline. Is he going to be a really good player this year, or is he going to be a really good player in 2026? I think Ahmad Boaten's very talented too. Now he's got to get his focus dialed in and not be reckless out on the field, but he can flash in a big way. And then David Blaze is kind of like your veteran, solid, dependable D tackle, making that jump from Louisiana Tech. So I feel more comfortable there. Safety, I liked the little bit I saw from Poyser in the spring. But to your point, like, yeah, it's a jump from Jacksonville State. So we'll see. And then Jacoby Thomas, I don't know. I don't really have an opinion. So, um, they're veteran guys, they're experienced guys. Um, but are they going to be good enough? I think that's a totally fair thing to wonder about. So I wouldn't push back on that question at all. To me, like those are the two positions to really kind of keep an eye on during the course of fall camp and even game one against Notre Dame. Evan0607. In year four, we finally built a roster that could possibly compete for a natty in comparison to all the other big programs. Or in your opinion, are we still a year away or two? So I don't know. I'm probably taking both sides of this. The way I'll answer this is I think Miami is in that tier of teams that could compete for a national championship. I think they have the pieces to go do it. Now they still need some things to come together. And if those things come together, absolutely, I think Miami can do it. But if you look at the sport this year, just going into the season, and as we start playing games, we're gonna have obviously a way better feel for who the real teams are and who isn't. But on paper, right now, going into the season, to me, there's not really like a clear cut, okay, this team has all the important pieces. This team doesn't really have question marks. I think, you know, there's certainly those legacy programs that have been good the last 4 years, 5 years, and they're always going to be in contention. But even some of those programs, to me, kind of have questions that need to be answered, and they might have the answers for them. To be fair, we just don't know yet. Um, like Notre Dame, to me, the team Miami's playing in the season opener, they're to me they're in the conversation as maybe having the best roster in the country. Now, quarterback is an unknown. Quarterback is a question mark, and that's a significant question mark, especially in a game one against a real opponent like Miami. Outside of the quarterback, though, I think Notre Dame's roster is very pretty, and I think they're very talented. So Notre Dame, if they had like a QB transfer, plug and play, a guy everyone knew with this roster, to me, they're like the clear-cut number one overall team. I think Penn State also has a very strong roster on paper. Can they finally get over the hump? That's gonna always be the question with them because beating Ohio State is tough. That's the big brand in that conference, and Penn State hasn't been able to do that here in this recent era. Alabama and Georgia, to me, like they're both still very good. Um, but to me, they're like a step below what they were 3 or 4 years ago in terms of just pure talent and what they bring to the field. LSU, very interesting team to me. Like to me, they could be that portal team that's like, all right, they went all in on the portal, added a ton of talent in the portal. They already had a lot of talent returning as well, and now they're just really talented. Texas, you know, everyone thinks Arch Manning's going to be good. I frankly think Arch Manning's going to be good, but you don't know. But Texas on paper looks real nice too, but there's question marks there. Clemson to me is like the hot team because maybe they're like the most obvious team on paper in terms of what they look like going into a season. But to me, like Clemson last year was what? I mean, in the regular season they were 9-3. To me, like they were 9-3 for a reason. And they're probably better this year. But I also would not be surprised if they're 9-3 again this year. Trying to think, Ohio State, Oregon, they have new quarterbacks, so that's something they got to figure out. So all this is to say, like, look, do I think on paper Miami can go toe to toe with these teams? I do. I do. Miami does have questions, like all these other teams. Uh, but you look at Miami, they're strong where you need to be strong. Quarterback, I am pro Carson Beck. I have been pro Carson Beck since Miami added him. Offensive line, Miami's one of the best offensive lines in the country. Defensive line, um, I think it's good. I think it can potentially be great if like a Justin Scott's ready to go this year, and then corner. I don't think people realize how good Miami's corners are going into this season. So areas that need to be addressed and figured out. Uh, but I think they're on the fringe of being in that tier of like, okay, they could go on a run and put it all together. And frankly, like in this new college football playoff seeding format too, getting that bye is critical. So if Miami gets on a roll, handles business in game one against Notre Dame, handles business again against Florida, and then gets on a roll in ACC play and they become a team that kind of earns that bye week in the playoff, that's a huge advantage. And when you have that, when you're that bye team, um, that puts you in a significant spot to make a run at the uh, national championship game, getting there and winning it. So uh, all this is to say, look, I can this roster be nitpicked? Yes. Um, is Miami a top 10 team? Yes. To me, they're a top 10 team. Is there like 3 or 4 teams that are significantly better than the 10th, the ninth or 10th best team, wherever? Like I would put Miami in that 8, 9, 10 category. This year, going into this year, our teams 1, 2, and 3 significantly better than 8, 9, 10. Going into the season, I don't think that's the case. And so now, after the first month, I might feel differently. Like, wow, this team is on a different level. But I think Miami's in the mix. Are they? Is there still areas that are a year away, like safety? Yes. D tackle, I'd like to see a little bit more there. Like you can nitpick Miami, but I think nowadays with the portal and NIL, you can go around the country and nitpick every roster. And so it's just about playing to your strengths, figuring it out week to week to week, and getting results. So get out of here on that note. Appreciate everyone for listening. Again, go support our people. Canes Connection, Miami's Collective, 24/7 Friends, 247 Friends, promo code 50% off your first month there. Nick Muserino at the MuserinoLawGroup.com. Go hit him up if you've been in a car accident or have any type of needs that require law work. So appreciate everyone for listening. Camp right around the corner, July 31st, first day of camp. I believe media day for UM is going to be the day before, July 30th. So plenty coming down the pipe here as it relates to Miami Hurricanes football. College football is finally here, thankfully. And until next time, take care.